Welcome to this week's news report. I'm your host and editor, Diana Longry. Thank you for tuning in. My co-anchor, Mr. Kevin Berglund, is out on assignment. Today we are going to continue our report on the tax increment financing plans, the big tax increment financing plans that the City Council and staff of Maplewood have for the Gladstone neighborhood in Maplewood. Now, for those of you who have been watching our program in the past, you have heard a little bit about this already. For those of you that are new to this report, you're going to want to listen carefully, because while this tax increment financing discussion and report specifically has to do with Maplewood, Minnesota, many of the principles and the questions that should be asked when implementing tax increment financing are the same no matter what community you live in, because tax increment financing is a creature of Minnesota state statute. And so how it's applied, how it's used, and the rules that govern tax increment financing are the same throughout the state. Now, in our report, this tax increment financing that we're discussing focuses on the properties in the Gladstone neighborhood of Maplewood, which is generally in the location of the intersection of Frost and English Street. For those of you that may not be familiar with Maplewood and its neighborhoods, let me give you sort of a little idea about the neighborhood we're talking about. If you were to find yourself on 35E coming out of St. Paul, Minnesota, and you see the exit for Highway 36 going east, and you want to go east to Stillwater, well, go east on Highway 36. And as you travel along east on Highway 36, only a few miles from that intersection of 36 and Interstate 35E, you will find an exit that says English Street. Well, that, of course, is the English Street we're talking about. So if you take off and go south on English Street at that exit, and you go roughly 1 mile or so, you will come to an intersection of Frost and English where there is a roundabout. And so that is the neighborhood that we're talking about. It's one of Maplewood's older neighborhoods. It is a neighborhood that is generally all single-family residential. It is also the location of two significant greenway trails, one being the Bruce Vento Trail, which is slated for destruction because it's going to be converted over to a bus rapid transit route instead, and the Gateway Trail, which is managed by the DNR. Now that, of course, is not slated for decimation like the Bruce Vento Trail is. At this location, there are already a number of TIF projects already currently in production, in construction, or that are planned. Certainly, Sherman and Associates, they have their Phase 1, which is a TIF district at that location. Their Phase 2, which is under the TIF plan, and they are proposing that their Phase 3 be approved in time for additional TIF support so that it's within this 5-year window of time. Now, coincidentally, the City of Maplewood just purchased the former Moose Lodge, which is on the other corner of this intersection, and they are planning tax increment financing as a way to get their money back, the money that they used that is the taxpayers' dollars, because they use taxpayer dollars to do land speculation. So you see, there's a lot of tax increment financing going to go on in that neighborhood. And as we hear later in this news program, there's also the proposal of having tax increment financing on the third corner of that intersection. Now, for those of you listening to this, you're saying, okay, so they've got tax increment financing on the northwest corner of that intersection. The city is planning on having tax increment financing in the northeast intersection, a corner of that intersection. And then there's a proposal for tax increment financing in the southeast corner of that intersection. Wow! Are they also going to have tax increment financing proposed for the southwest corner of that intersection? Well, I can tell you the easy answer to that. You may think it's yes, but no, the answer is no. And the reason it is no is because that corner is the neighborhood preserve or the savanna, which is the green space that was purchased with taxpayer referendum dollars a number of years back and is not supposed to be developed at all. However, as years go by in the future, perhaps in 10, 15 years, the city, desperate for money, will decide that the promise that they made to the residents not to develop land bought with referendum money doesn't need to be adhered to, because nobody will remember the promise that had been made many years ago, and that they'll sell that property and develop that too. But that's for the vigilant residents of Maplewood to keep their eyes on in the next 10 to 15 years. Today, that's not part of our report. But let's take a look at our first clip, which is one that we had from our past report, which talks about one of Maplewood's tax increment financing districts up by the Maplewood Mall that is not producing as it should and is actually in a deficit. So let's recall that clip.
111, again, this is an economic development district from 2010. As I mentioned, it was created under a special authority there, the Job Stimulus Program, which was a temporary period of time to create these kind of districts for uses that you wouldn't otherwise have been able to use them for. And so there were public improvements in infrastructure around the mall site. This one is done in 2022. Those project costs were internally funded. There's currently a negative balance of about $150,000 in this district, and there isn't any increment projected for 2019. It's just a function of where the values have been with the mall. And so this is the only one where, of your districts, where it's not quite performing the way you'd probably like it to. But in this case, because there is more useful life in the district, it goes until 2022. If things turn around, the hope is that you could potentially erase that negative balance and deal with it that way. But it's not a huge problem, and if this is the biggest problem that you have in your long list of TIF districts, then you're doing pretty well for yourself.
The consultant that's providing this analysis of this particular TIF district, I find it interesting that he says if things turn around, you might be able to recoup some of these losses that are coming out of this tax increment financing district. However, what is it that was constructed as part of that tax increment financing district? Why, it was a sidewalk around the ring road. Now, how do we think that there's going to be any kind of changes that are going to impact that sidewalk that suddenly are going to make that particular area that is under this TIF project to make it somehow income producing? At the time when this TIF district was entered into, the Maplewood Mall management and owner, they were asked if they wanted to join in and be a part of this TIF district. And they actually declined and said no, they did not. So the only entity that is part and party to this TIF district is the city of Maplewood. There is no developer, there was no development, it was a sidewalk. Now, of course, later we'll have a clip where Brian Smith is trying to figure out an angle that maybe somehow that Maplewood can try to change this, but we'll get to that. Our next clip now goes into the financial risks associated with the proposal of Sherman and Associates to have tax increment financing provided by the City of Maplewood to Sherman and Associates for the third phase of their development on that northwest corner of the intersection of Frost and English. Let's take a look.
As I mentioned, that adjacent property would need to be acquired, but not only that, it would also need to be brought into the district, or we would need to take the existing Phase 3 property out of the district and try to create one new district. There are pros, cons, and complications with all of those things, but we would need to sort through what would be the best option in this case.
Now, at this corner, this intersection, besides the development that Sherman and Associates have already constructed, there is an apartment building of 50 units, 40 of which are voucher housing, 10 of which are supposed to be market value, but we have at market rate, and we have not gotten a confirmation of that. The second phase was a senior complex, which was built and sold to the City Council as being market rate senior housing, but we have gotten reports that many of the seniors that are moving in there now, because they didn't qualify for market rate rental amounts, that some of those units are actually now voucher housing as well. Now, while we don't, of course, begrudge seniors having the opportunity of voucher housing, because it is certainly necessary for the seniors of our community, it's how it's sold to the City Council and how the developer puts their package together and what their claims are in the beginning. If in the beginning they talked about the desire to have voucher housing for the seniors of our community, that would be one thing. But it's quite a different thing when they come in, say that they're going to have market rate housing, and then because they find that the market doesn't support market rate housing in that neighborhood, that they then do a bait and switch and change it to something different. Because you see, decisions are made by the City Council and by people of the community based upon the representations that are made at the time by the developer. And so when people decide that they want to buy a house in that neighborhood, or that they want to move into that neighborhood, or that they want to open a business in that neighborhood, all these factors come into play, because some business owners might say, yes, I would like to open up my business in a neighborhood where I know that they're going to be having a brand new senior complex of 170 units, all market rate. Because that's an indication that these seniors have the disposable income to perhaps buy the goods and services that that particular business is interested in selling. So what happens? They set up their shop, they set up their business and all the expense of that, and then they come to find out that what was presented was going to go in there, suddenly, midstream, changes. Now suddenly they don't have that customer base that they relied upon when they made their business decision. So you can see how important it is that when we're talking about community development and economic development in our neighborhoods, that we have a clear, honest, and transparent discussion and not a lot of bait and switch, because people who are not inside the loop of what's going on in City Hall have no idea what to rely upon other than what's presented to the public. Well, let's take a look at the next clip, which further goes into the risk for the City Council and the City of Maplewood, ultimately the taxpayers, if there is indeed this financial assistance given to Sherman and Associates, because not only are they looking for tax increment financing, but they are also looking for a loan potentially that's forgivable. Taxpayer dollars that are forgivable. Let's take a look at that clip.
Proposed loan would be from some other city source. So $600,000 from some other city source. We thought as going through this process, well, would there be some TIF available? Could we pool to make this loan? But through this analysis of all these districts, there isn't any TIF available as a source to be able to make this loan. And one of the things we tell every city contemplating, and there are several that have contemplated and entered into loans like this, is that you need to be comfortable that you might not ever get it back. And the numbers right now show that you may well, and you very well could get it back, but I never want to stand up here and say, don't worry about it, you'll get your money back, because you just need to know that that may not happen.
Now, at this corner that we're talking about, besides the Sherman properties that have been developed in the empty space that is hopefully being proposed to be developed, there is a liquor store that is not owned by Sherman and Associates. It's owned by a business owner. And initially, Sherman and Associates told the City Council that they could do phases 1 through 3 without disturbing that particular property, that business, and that owner, and that they wouldn't need to buy her property in order to make phase 3 happen. But you see, now things have changed. And so we're talking about the same phase 3, but now Sherman and Associates is saying that in order to make phase 3 work, that they need that property where that liquor store is. Well, at this point, and at this particular council workshop, which is in June 2019, that liquor store owner was not really of the mind that she wanted to sell her business. And she didn't really want to relocate either. So here they are looking to try to get, well, in essence, $1 million from the city. Sherman and Associates, their costs have gone up because they need to buy out that property owner. So they're looking for $1 million from the city. They don't have $1 million on their own to make this work. They're looking to the city to give them $1 million. $400,000 of it in tax increment financing, $600,000 of it, as you heard, from the city, from some source of the city's funds. Well, the last time that the city had to go find funding, money, in the city coffers from another source, like when they bought that Moose Lodge for approximately 20% over the market value, is that they had to go into the sanitary sewer utility fund and rob $2 million out of there, which is typically used for road reconstruction. So they use the money that they would usually use for road reconstruction work to buy land for speculation. Now we have Sherman and Associates saying to the city, well, we need some help from you so we can buy some land and we can do some speculation too, and so we can build the thing that we promised you several years ago that we could build without your help. The consultant is supposed to be working for the city of Maplewood. However, it's hard to tell if he represents the city of Maplewood or if he represents the interests of Sherman and Associates. It's rather murky as you listen to the film footage during the rest of the news report. Let's take a look.
For instance, at the mall, we have that economic development district. Could a residential district or a different kind of district be overlap, say if we wanted to build something in the parking lot or somewhere else around there, like housing or another purpose?
Well, no. This is maybe the simple answer, but you can accomplish what you're asking. You can either build that project within the existing district and then collect the increment that would be captured because it's already in the district, or you can carve out that parcel that would be housing, for example, and put that in its own new district, provided it qualified to be in its own new district. So I think you could get to what you're asking about. It's just you can't have two districts overlap on the same parcel.
Great. And then one other question.
Here's Brian Smith going back to that question about that TIF district up by the Maplewood Mall, the sidewalk project. He's asking about, well, gee whiz, what if we build an apartment complex in the middle of the parking lot there, and then we call that a TIF district and combine it with the sidewalk project, and that way then we can make things look good on the books. And the consultant says, well, no, it doesn't really work that way. You can't have overlapping TIF districts. That, you know, if where you're looking to build something is within the TIF district you currently have, then yes, maybe you can do that. However, this consultant, because he wasn't really hired to look at all of this, he's not really giving them the full and complete answer in that the city of Maplewood doesn't own that property. Those entities, whoever they are that owns that property where that proposal is to be constructed, they have to join in on this, and there's been no interest from what we've been able to find in our reports of anyone up at the Maplewood Mall to enter into a tax increment financing arrangement with the city of Maplewood. Now let's continue with our next clip.
Loan like this, do we hold security in the property as well, or is it unsecured?
Well, and
Or
we
is
have
that up
Ron
to
here
us?
as well, but generally speaking, your security is going to be a second mortgage, which, you know, is subordinate to the developer's primary mortgage. Potentially other guarantees on the part of the developer, but that would all be subject of negotiation. We haven't gotten into that.
Sure.
I don't know anything else, Ron, that, I mean.
So now we have Brian Smith switching back to this loan that's being proposed by Sherman and Associates and the consultant who supposedly is supposed to be working on behalf of the city. And so Brian Smith is asking, well, do we have some kind of security? Because if we're giving them a loan, shouldn't we have some kind of security in the event that they are not going to be good to their word and pay that debt back? Well, the consultant says, well, sure, you could, but you're going to be second in line. You're going to be second in line to the lender that has the first mortgage. Well, this is how this works, is that, let's say you have that first mortgage on there, and that lender has to start a foreclosure proceedings. When you do that, then that lender has to give notice to whoever may be the junior lien holder of that of a mortgage or a lien on that property. So the bank, if they were starting foreclosure proceedings, they would have to notify the city of Maplewood if they were a junior lien holder. Then Maplewood, being a junior lien holder, has a certain time frame in which they can save their interest in this property. And in order to save their interest in this property and not have their lien extinguished as a result of the foreclosure done by the bank, they have to buy out the interests of the bank. That's how the city of Maplewood would keep their interest alive. So is that really a position that the city wants to be in? That they would have to buy out the bank's interest in order to preserve their $600,000 interest in that property? Well, I don't know if I, as a taxpayer, think that sounds like a very good strategy for the city to be following. It sounds like it could be risky. Now, I have joining me with this news report today, Mr. Joseph Waters. You recognize him from coming on the program Off the Record News on a regular basis. Thank you, Mr. Waters, for being here.
Well, I'm glad to be here, Mayor. This is a rather interesting conversation. I mean, this is typical of the city of Maplewood to buy out their interest, to protect their interest. I mean, That's interesting. I find that fascinating.
Well, and that's the state law of how foreclosure works. It's just very simply, that's the way that the foreclosure laws in Minnesota work. That if you're a junior lien holder, if you don't do something to protect your interest, which is to buy out the guy ahead of you who's doing the foreclosure, your interest is extinguished. It's gone. Now, you still have a financial recourse, but unsecured, to go and try to collect money from the entity that owes you money. But since you're unsecured now,
You're
good
just
luck with that.
Yeah, you're in line with everyone else. So you may get pennies on a dollar is what I'm hearing.
Yes, exactly. Well, let's move on to our next clip as they continue this discussion.
No, I think that's a good summary, and I'd go back to the point that Jason made at the beginning. The loans like this would be risky, and so you'd have to be comfortable that you might not see your money. It's kind of out of the ordinary in terms of the use of tax increment.
The city attorney says it's risky and that this is out of the ordinary when it comes to how you put together a tax increment financing plan. That this is not the way it's typically done.
Well, just when I heard his two words, this is risky and out of the ordinary, that should be red flags right there. It says, maybe we shouldn't do this. Maybe this is something we should not be involved in, because this is, like you said, it's putting the taxpayers' dollars at risk, because the city's got to find a way to make up for that loss somewhere else. I mean, how many of those losses can you sustain over a period of time?
Right, and we already know that they've taken out $2 million worth out of the sanitary sewer utility fund in order to finance their whole program having to do with purchasing the Moose Lodge property and their costs of doing demolition and environmental reclamation and all the things they need to do in order to make it development ready for some developer, which they've already said their preferred developer is Sherman and Associates, to come in and just rescue them by building something so that they can all partner together and do tax increment financing to try to get that $2 million back into the city coffers.
Interesting. Sounds like a casino run to my if you ask me.
Yes, a Ponzi scheme, I think, was what we called it in one particular show.
Yeah, I think I remember that one.
So let's continue.
Council members, any other questions? Anything else? Okay.
You want direction on that?
Mr. Thompson, would you like to add anything to the discussion?
Yeah.
So that is the appointed mayor, Marley Abrams, big-eyed, woohoo, asking, are there any questions of the council? And the council is sitting there stupefied. The city attorney has just told them that this is risky and it's out of the ordinary. Do you have any questions? Not a question at all, as she's just sitting there big-eyed like, oh my gosh. And you would think that maybe she comes from a background of not having a lot of experience in the law, not having a lot of experience with business or how things operate in the business world, except she has been a skilled litigator and she's a licensed attorney. And I think she does attorney work for the city of Richfield, but she's been a skilled litigator for 30 years. Any questions, anyone? Big-eyed?
Well, this was a workshop, if I remember correctly, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, it seems like someone should be saying, let's put the brakes on this and dive into this a little bit deeper. Do we really want to take this type of risk with the taxpayers' funds? Or my preferred way of looking at it is, okay, if Sherman Associates may be their preferred developer, I'm sure there are other developers out there that they should be talking to. I mean, I can think of a couple names off the top of my head. I'm not going to mention them, but I would think that they should put the brakes on and maybe look at and see what other developers would think of this particular project and what they could bring to the table to see how we can bring that risk down.
Right, exactly. And as we reported on a previous week on Local News Report here, it was identified that this particular TIF district, in order to be able to bring the Phase 3 into the confines of this tax increment financing district, that Sherman and Associates have a time deadline. So they can't put the brakes on it. That's why they need to push this through. And they also have a time deadline that they can't put the brakes on it because you see the approval of their nod, so to speak, for tax increment financing and to proceed is on the consent agenda for the council meeting that very night. Because you see, it's already on the agenda. It's already scheduled. They can't change the plan. It's already been printed. Heaven forbid we change it. Oh my gosh. We'd waste all that ink that we spent to just type up that agenda. Well, let's continue and see where they go from here.
Slides back up. We had a couple things at the end just to cover on the item that's on your consent agenda tonight. So JB Vang is looking at a potential development on the southeast corner in the Gladstone neighborhood as well, on the southeast corner of Frost and English. There we go, thanks. As part of their financing for their project, they are looking to apply for some tax credits through the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. That's a competitive process that they need to go through. So in order to help support their application, they are requesting the council just adopt a resolution generally supporting the project for the 60 units of affordable housing and their application to MHFA to kind of just show that there is kind of general city support behind it. It is all subject to understanding this is not the entitlement process, this isn't zoning approvals, this isn't any approval of the tax increment financing they may also request, but it's general support for that type of project occurring within that neighborhood. So we just wanted to give the opportunity to outline that and answer any questions while Jason is here as part of his TIF management report.
So as an afterthought, because you see, appointed Mayor Marley Abrams was basically giving a signal to everybody that we're done talking about this, except that the consultant says, well, we got a couple more slides we really got to go through, because you see, this consent agenda, that item that's coming up on the council meeting, that's like in a half an hour from this time period when they're discussing this slide, also includes this resolution of support for tax increment financing on that southeast corner of that intersection that we talked about earlier in our newscast. So you see, that's the other part of this tax increment financing plan for the Gladstone. And this is really the first time that the council in a public venue has heard about this particular project. Again, as you can hear, this project is totally dependent upon everybody else's money. Every other governmental entity there is out there is expected or going to be asked to contribute their share to this project. So let's continue as they discuss this more.
That there are some other slides concerning the housing request?
Is there one more slide?
There's one more slide. Maybe we want to go through that as well.
I can't. There we go.
Yeah. I can run through them.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, as Jeff mentioned, the request is this resolution of support. The reason they're asking for it is because the 9% tax credit process is competitive. You may all know this, I don't know, but and it's a point system. And so they're gonna score their application, and whoever gets the most points, generally speaking, are the ones that get funded. And one of the ways that they can claim points in that application process is for financial readiness.
So once the consultant started down that road of showing the slides, then appointed Mayor Marley Abrams thought, well, okay, since there is a slide up there, I guess we probably should talk about that second slide, because now this is where the consultant was thinking, well, maybe the mayor was really signaling to me that we really shouldn't move forward. We're talking about this more. But then she sees that he's doing this, so then she's giving him the signal, oh no, that's okay. Looks like there's another slide. Well, what kind of goofiness is that? Either you're going to give a presentation and talk about this in the public forum where everybody understands what's going on, or you're just going to do it in the back room like you've been doing it anyway. Mr. Waters, did you see that little shenanigans going on there?
The little
where one-
the little sleight of hand is kind of how I looked at it. Like, oh yeah, we need to talk about this very briefly. You
Yes,
know?
that makes sense.
It's almost like, okay, what is this housing project? I mean, well, you know, why do they need this? Why do they need this letter of support? You know, what are we supporting? So forth. I mean, obviously, they want to get some tax credits through the Minnesota Housing Financing Fund, but exactly what does this project entail? You know, and why do we have to commit up to almost over $600,000 to this project? Do we even have the $600,000 to potentially commit? So it's like there's no, like you said, it's done in the back room, probably a non-smoking room. I'll just throw that out there. But still, it's kind of like it's kind of like just do this, would you?
Right.
For us to help us out.
So let's continue with our next clip.
All of their other financing sources, to the extent that those are committed, they can claim for those points. And so in this case, that's what they're doing. They're claiming the city TIF support as points in their application process. And that the resolution is what Minnesota Housing requires in order for them to actually be able to claim the points in the application. So no resolution, no points. They're asking for $614,000. The resolution, should commit up to that amount.
And yet we don't even know when or how the property is going to be purchased for this project. Because currently that is the site of the Legacy Hmong Funeral Home, which every week that I drive by there, on the days that are the funeral days, the parking lot's full. And they still have funerals going on there at that Legacy Funeral Home. So what gives with the timeline? We don't know. Let's continue.
Like this process because it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg thing where you're saying that we already commit to an amount, but they don't even know if they're funded yet. And so, what we like to say is that we would want to confirm that that amount is still the right amount. We've looked at their application, we've analyzed it like we would. We think it's an okay ask at this moment, but we'd want to reserve the right to be able to, look at that again.
So here's the fascinating thing I find, Mr. Waters, is that it says that Ehlers confirms the need for tax increment financing.
Yeah, I caught that.
I can never tell when a consultant like this says a statement like that. Are they working on behalf of the developer because they're promoting the developer's project? Ultimately, that's who wants the tax increment financing, is the developer. Or are they representing the city, trying to look at it analytically and saying, well, there's a lot of holes in this project, and this is why we would recommend that you don't do it, or what other types of measures should be in place before you consider it.
Well, as I listened to that and I listened to your analysis, to me, there is a conflict of interest. Like you said, who are you representing, the developer or the city? You got to pick sides, basically. If you're representing the city, you should be asking for a lot more information, and that information should be put in front of the city council, in this case, in the workshop, so that they can take a deep dive into it, assuming they'll take a deep dive into it. If you're representing the developer, this shouldn't even be brought up, as far as I'm concerned. But you basically need to pick sides. Right now, you're walking the fence and you're playing both sides of the aisle, and to me, you're potentially doing harm to both your clients.
Right, exactly. Because when I look at this, the consultant is supposed to be the expert, but how can that person, that entity, be the expert for both sides.
You can't. You can't.
In the court of law, each side has their expert. And then they present their expert opinion, their expert evidence, whatever it is, to, let's say, the judge or to the jury. And then you have the battle of the experts, of their opinions, of the facts. And then the fact finder is the one that takes a look and determines what is the one to follow.
And generally, a fact finder will not make the decision right on the spot. They'll actually take time to analyze the evidence in front of them and then come out with a ruling or a decision.
Right, and you would think that the appointed mayor, Marley Abrams, who's been a skilled litigator for 30 years, would come to the council table with this type of background and ask these questions. But she doesn't, and she also does not require the city manager to conduct herself in that manner also, either to ask for more of an independent analysis of these tax increment financing proposals of these developers.
What I'm surprised is that the city council's attorney is not putting the brakes on this. Because listening to this gentleman speak, Mr. Beatty, I believe his name is, you would think with his background, he'd say, well, council, don't vote on this because these are the holes that are missing. This is what's missing in general. So you'd think even council, the city council's attorney would put the brakes on this, even if the city manager doesn't understand that, even though she has a background in development.
Yes. Well, let's continue.
It's a tax credit project. It can be in a housing TIF district. We ran the numbers. It looks like their request could be repaid in about 15 years. So that's really what it equates to, that $614,000. So.
Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to be clear, this is on the funeral home property? It is. And, I mean, this resolution of support would be non-binding in any way. It's just sort of a so far so good kind of
That's right.
thumbs up.
Yes, even though it's written in such a way that they require it to be sounding like a commitment. But the fact is, you can't commit to tax increment without holding a public hearing, without making certain findings. And so, yes, it's all
Well,
of that
frankly,
still
we
needs to
can't
happen.
commit to support until we know what is
More
the
about the
property,
project, right.
how's it gonna fit in the neighborhood, and
Yeah.
what's the nature of the affordable housing, and all that sort of stuff too. So, I mean, based on these several bullet points, I think it sounds great, but I think there's certainly more investigation to be done.
All of what you just heard is a bunch of fake talk. That is meaningless because certainly this resolution of support is not binding, and certainly they have to have a public hearing on it. But once an organization has a resolution of support like this, everybody is counting on it to go through. Because what would happen then, you get up to the final goal line, and then the council says, okay, now we're going to have a meaningful public hearing on this, where the public can actually look at the numbers and identify the issues and bring up the problems, and that we're going to listen to them at the public hearing and then say, oh my gosh, the public is right. How could we have missed this? You know, that's right. We're not going to grant this tax increment financing. You just got to tell everybody else to go packing because we're not going to do this.
That's just not going to happen at all. It's like like you said, you said it's non-binding, but it's kind of like you pretty much bound yourself to this agreement.
Absolutely.
Everybody's going to say, like, well, you agreed to it. Yeah, but it's a non-binding resolution. Yeah, but you agreed to this, right? Well, yeah. Well, okay. We move forward.
And you said it sounded good.
It sounded good. Yeah, these are our best guess estimates, but they were just estimates. We didn't realize that something was going to happen to cause the price to go up, which means you're going to have to contribute more to this project.
Right, or that they had a faulty business plan. I mean, they haven't even seen a business plan.
Well, my question is, who is this JB Vang, excuse me. Who is this JB Vang? What's their history? I mean, have they done any projects in the past? Are they a new startup? So forth.
Well, I think according to the Secretary of State, they've only been in business for a few years.
Okay.
And that they've never really done these types of projects, that they manage property.
Oh, okay. Well, what kind of property? Did they manage properties under a different name? Because as we all know, you can go down to the Secretary of State's office and easily change your name. I mean, it's done in the construction business quite a bit. I've talked to contractors or people that have been in the construction business. They run into a problem. They just file bankruptcy and then they incorporate under a completely different name.
Right. Well, you know what? None of those questions were asked at the council, not by the skilled litigator, the appointed mayor, or by anybody else.
Well, I didn't have much time.
Oh, that's right. That's right. They had to get to that consent agenda
Exactly.
so they could approve their tax increment financing resolutions.
Correct.
Therein. Okay, well, let's continue with our film footage.
Question concerning the project that's coming up for consideration on our consent agenda. The number, the $614,000, based on what you've indicated to us in your PowerPoint and your response to Councilmember Smith, I take it that that number could change based on additional information as the process develops? Is that accurate?
I think that's fair. It could definitely change. I mean, they're going to put their application into Minnesota Housing with this number in it. And so when they come back, it'll probably continue to be what their ask is, the $614,000. But again, we'd have to, you know, at that point in time, because we could be talking about a year from now when they actually come back if they get funded, you know, is the number still good? Sometimes if these are based on 26 years, we may find that, well, the tax rate went down or something else happened that we can't get there anymore, and so we need to rerun it and look at it again. So yes, it could definitely change.
But this council has not had a discussion about what amount of change that they're comfortable with. For instance, we know from the audio that we obtained from the closed meeting that they had in 2018 when they made a policy as to how much the city council was willing to overpay to buy property above the market value. We know what that number is. They are willing to overpay 25% above market value. That's the policy they created in that closed meeting in 2018, and that's the direction and the directive that they gave the city manager when she's going out there and negotiating the purchase of properties by the city of Maplewood. So what is that level of change that this city council is comfortable with when it comes to tax increment financing? Would it also be 25% difference in change? More or less? Certainly less. They'd be comfortable with less. But the question is, how much more would they be comfortable? If $614,000 is acceptable, would $700,000 be acceptable? Because see, then they can save face. Well, it's only a little bit more.
Well, I was just thinking if they could accept, if they said if they're willing to pay 25% more to get a piece of property that they're probably going to use for a transit stop that's not going to bring in any revenue to the city, 25% more of $614,000, just off the top of my head, is roughly $140,000. So you're almost up to $800,000 of potential commitment. You would think you would think someone would say, okay, we're asking for $614,000 up to this level, but there could be a change. You would think someone would say, we need to cap it at $650, or we need to cap it at $625.
And see, and they could have included that in their resolution to say that here's our resolution of support for this amount of TIF support. But that's the cap on it.
Correct.
They could have done that.
And the thing is, I'd like to even see the resolution. They keep saying there's a resolution asking for this amount. I'd like to actually read the resolution itself.
Well, it's in the consent agenda. Didn't you see it?
Oh, well, I must have missed it. Darn.
And of course they didn't. We reported this on a previous show in that when it came to the consent agenda to approve it, they didn't even pull it off of the consent agenda so that they could share with the public what the resolution was.
Interesting. That's rather interesting. Yeah, just getting back to capping, what their acceptable risk is. It's even in private investment, they'll say, I'm going to cap my investment in any project at a certain level. And again, that's what these folks need to be doing. We'll support $614,000, but we're going to cap it at $625 or $650. If it goes any higher than that, you're going to be responsible to figure out where you're going to get that difference from.
Right, and another reason.
Oh, the
too-
other thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry to
Yes,
cut you
go
off.
ahead.
I was thinking, we could have a recession. Are we still going to be committed to that $614,000 if it's substantially less? Suppose it's 25% less. Are you going to then say, are you still going to commit to the 614, or are you going to 614 minus 25%? I'm not very fast on numbers, but my guess that'd be around over 400,000 right there. So are you willing to say this is the floor and this is the ceiling?
Right, exactly. And here's another reason why it's important to understand that wiggle room to speak of. Because the consultant said that according to their calculations that the $614,000 in tax increment financing support could be paid back in 15 years. He didn't make it sound like there was going to be well above the amount being collected in 15 years so that they could actually recover more. He made it sound like they're barely going to be able to cover the $614,000 in 15 years for recovery of those funds. So if they do go to the $800,000 number, which is, that 25% over and above the asking amount, that won't be covered in the 15 years. So now it changes those numbers. So does the tax increment financing district have to then be extended to 26 years like the one across the street? There.
Interesting.
See, these are questions that aren't being asked at a workshop, which is supposed to be their working session, except the council is doing no work.
Definitely see that. I'm surprised this has not been brought up under the Economic Development Authority versus a workshop by the city council. Because that authority, to me, this should be addressed under the EDA
Right.
versus a workshop.
Well, they only use the EDA when it's convenient to use that vehicle, mainly to collect more money.
Yeah, that's for sure.
So let's continue.
Could you just give us a brief overview of what the process would look like if, in fact, I know what's on our consent agenda basically is to indicate or to inkle support from the council so that that support can be used as part of their application. But then what actually happens? Let's make an assumption that they were awarded the money from housing. So then what happens next? I think that might be helpful for
Sure.
everyone to kind of
Yeah,
understand
so-
that.
Now, there's a new legal term for me, an inkle. It's going to inkle our intentions. Yeah. How you like that one? Let's just get an inkling out of it.
Yeah, it sounds like a sliver, just a little piece of it.
Well, let's see what the answer is.
Getting ready to submit their application now. Those all will go in, and we know just from our own work with other clients that there are a bunch of tax credit applications that are going to be going into them. And maybe at best 1 in 4 of those get funded, right? So there may not even be a funding that happens. We'll find that out towards the end of the year. If they're awarded, as you asked and suggested, then they would be coming back next year in 2020, asking you to potentially start the tax increment process. And so they'd be applying to you to formally create a TIF district and enter into an agreement to actually provide that tax increment assistance for the project. Probably about that same time, they would formally make application from a land use standpoint. I don't know if they're doing that already or where they're at in that process. But usually that would happen along that same time frame. Once they know whether they got funding or not, they'll spend the money to create the plans and do all the things they need to do and submit that. And so usually we can run the TIF process concurrent with the land use and entitlement process. So depending upon when they wanted to do that, but generally by about this time next year, we would be through all of that, have an agreement with them, a TIF district established, and they could theoretically be breaking ground, about this time frame next year. But again, if they aren't funded, then they may have to go back into the subsequent year's round and try again, and that may push everything out 1 year further.
Now, in all of this process, where does the financial stability of the developer come into play? You would think that the various agencies that are giving their so-called inkling of support are looking into whether or not it's even a viable project, a viable developer, or whatever, because as we heard, there's going to be quite a few applications. Why go through the whole process of this review process if it turns out that who's putting in the application doesn't have the financial wherewithal to even bring the project home?
It just sounds cool.
Yeah.
We got an inkling of a chance of actually getting this approved.
Yes, that's right. That's the inkling theory. I like that. Well, let's conclude with one last clip.
Member Juniman has a question too.
I'm not sure if it's a question or a comment. In the Frost English Phase 2, where the 2 buildings went up, this might be an example, maybe you can help me, or possibly Melinda, or maybe even Jeff if he wasn't here, but that's how he's going to prove his mettle. Yes. Originally, Phase 2, the senior apartments was going to be 107 units of rent subsidized. And it went from that to 170 units, I believe, of market rate. And so, as I recall, there was a readjustment in the whole TIF part of that project. And so I only bring this up because that points out that what they're asking for may not be what they are offered even by us, depending on what we see.
Of course, Councilmember Kathleen Juniman always wants to do her rewrite of history or to show that she's the know-it-all. Well, of course, if they don't develop what they're going to develop, the things are going to have to change. But she's trying to make it sound like, well, that's the reason why we can go ahead with this, because, well, it's all in flux and we can all change whatever we want anyway. Well, I guess they are all council members and they can do what they want, right, Joe?
Pretty much, they're God.
Well, I want to thank you, Mr. Waters, for being on the program today.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, for inviting me.
And viewers, thank you for tuning in to this week's news broadcast. Now, we are going to continue this on the Citizens Reporter, where we conclude, because after that, in another week or two, we're going to have the follow-up report on the City Council's meeting, where they actually then get to hear what Sherman and Associates are proposing for their big Phase 3 development. Thank you for tuning in. Bye-bye.
Then the proposed loan would be from some other city source. So $600,000 from some other city source. We thought as going through this process, well, would there be some TIF available? Could we pool to make this loan? But through this analysis of all these districts, there isn't any TIF available as a source to be able to make this loan. And one of the things we tell every city contemplating, and there are several that have contemplated and entered into loans like this, is that you need to be comfortable that you might not ever get it back. You need to be comfortable that you might not ever get it back.
Loans like this would be risky, and so you'd have to be comfortable that you might not see your money. It's kind of out of the ordinary in terms of the use of tax increment.